My daughter called me at 2:47 inches the morning. I know the exact time because I had just looked at the clock on my nightstand, the way old men do when sleep stops coming easy. The phone lit up and I saw her name, Claire, and something in my chest knew before I even answered. Dad? That was all she said. Just that one word. But I've known that voice for 31 years. I've heard it when she fell off her bicycle on Maple Street. When her dog died, the summer she turned 12. When she called from the hospital after her first miscarriage, I know every color that voice can turn. This was a color I hadn't heard before. Where are you? I was already sitting up, already reaching for my jeans on the chair. She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing, shallow, like something hurt. Claire, where are you right now? The rest stop. She whispered. En 80 near Harrisburg. I was 63 years old, 2 hours and 40 minutes away. And I hadn't driven at night in 2 years because of my eyes. None of that mattered. I picked up my keys. She was sitting on the curb outside the women's restroom when I pulled in. 3 hours later, she had a gas station blanket around her shoulders, the kind a trucker must have given her, and her left arm was pressed tight against her ribs. Her lip was split. One eye was swollen to a slit. She looked up when my headlights found her, and the look on her face was the thing that broke something open in me. Not relief. Something more complicated than relief, like she hadn't actually believed I would come. I had to look away for a second before I could get out of the car. I crouched down in front of her. I didn't say anything. She leaned her forehead against mine the way she used to do when she was small, and we stayed like that for a long moment. He didn't do it. She said finally, he wasn't there. He was in Pittsburgh. His mother arranged it. I helped her into the car. I turned the heat up even though it was June. I handed her the water bottle from my center console, and I waited until she'd drunk half of it before I asked her to start from the beginning. She'd met Daniel Holt 4 years ago at a fundraiser in Annapolis, where she worked for a nonprofit focused on veterans housing. Daniel was everything that looks good on paper. Georgetown law degree. Junior partner at a firm his grandfather had founded. Et al. Easy smile. The kind of manners that made older women say he was raised, right? His mother, Margaret Holt, had deep roots in Baltimore society. Old money, the kind of family that had portraits in hallways and expected the portraits to keep looking a certain way. Claire was a first-generation college graduate. Her mother, my late wife, Patricia, had worked the front desk at a dentist's office until the cancer took her. We had a small house in Fredericksburg, Virginia. A good life, but not a Holt kind of life. I'm black. Claire is my daughter, Margaret Holt. I would learn. Had never in her 71 years allowed for the possibility that her son would bring someone like Claire home for keeps. But Daniel had. He'd brought her home for Thanksgiving, then Christmas, then proposed on New Year's Eve in the house where he'd grown up, right in front of his mother, who had smiled with every muscle in her face except her eyes. Claire told me about that smile later. She'd noticed it. She'd told herself she was imagining things. She wasn't imagining things. The first year of the marriage was what Claire called the boiling frog year. Nothing you could point to. Margaret would compliment her outfit and then say, with the lightest possible laugh, that she'd never been able to wear that kind of color herself. She would ask Claire, at dinner parties, what it had been like growing up in that part of Fredericksburg, then pivot immediately to someone else before Claire could answer. She would tell stories about Daniel's previous girlfriend, a girl named Sloane, whose family had a house on the Eastern Shore with a particular warmth that had nothing to do with nostalgia and everything to do with contrast. Daniel noticed none of it, or he noticed and decided not to see it. Claire could never be sure which was worse. The second year was when the pressure started to look like love. Margaret began calling Claire every Sunday. These long, careful calls about nothing. And it wasn't until the third or fourth month of it that Claire realized every call ended the same way, with some small comment about how hard it must be, being so far from her own family, being so different from Daniel's world. Whether Claire had thought about what their children would face, whether she'd considered whether this was really fair to Daniel's future. Always gentle, always deniable, always leaving Claire a little hollowed out for the rest of the day. She told Daniel once, early on, he'd gone very quiet. Then he said his mother was just protective. He said Claire was sensitive. He said it in a kind voice, which almost made it worse. She stopped telling him by year 3. Something had changed in Margaret. The patience had thinned. Claire had gotten pregnant 8 weeks along. Not yet told anyone outside the two of them, and when Margaret found out, something shifted in her face that Claire said she would never forget. Not happiness. Not even an attempt at happiness. A kind of calculation. 6 weeks later, Claire lost the baby. The doctor said it was a spontaneous loss, common in early pregnancy. Claire grieved and Daniel held her, and Margaret sent flowers with a card that said, in her looping handwriting, "Sometimes God knows what we don't." Claire stared at that card for a long time before she put it face down in a drawer. 3 months after that, she found the envelope. She hadn't been snooping. She'd been looking for the car insurance documents in the filing cabinet, in the home office she and Daniel shared, and the envelope was between 2 folders near the back, unsealed, with her name written on the outside in Margaret's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout of a laboratory report, a private laboratory, not a hospital, with Claire's name on it, and a date that corresponded to the week before her first prenatal appointment. The report was about blood work. There were notes in the margin, also in Margaret's handwriting. The phrase used twice was genetic incompatibility. One line, underlined, said, "The child cannot be undone, but future ones can be managed." Claire sat on the floor of that office for an hour. She didn't know what the report meant in its technical details. She didn't know how Margaret had obtained her medical information. What she knew was the phrase, "future ones can be managed," and what it sat next to. And she knew that her first pregnancy had ended after Margaret discovered it. And she knew she was going to be very careful now about what she put in her body. She started taking photographs of everything in the house. She drove 40 minutes to a clinic in a different county for a full blood panel. She started keeping a journal on a notebook she locked in her car. She did all of this quietly. Over 6 weeks. While cooking dinner and attending Margaret's Sunday calls and acting like nothing had changed, what she found, piece by piece, was this: a supplement Margaret had been sending her every month for 2 years. Something labeled as a women's vitamin blend had been purchased in bulk from a supplier with no certifiable medical grade standing, a pharmacist friend of mine. When I later described the label, said the dosages listed on the bottle weren't consistent with any standard supplement she knew. Claire had been taking them without question because Margaret had given them to her. And the same way Margaret gave everyone in her orbit things they were supposed to be grateful for. She found the financial records next. Not because she went looking, but because she accidentally opened an email meant for Daniel on their shared household account. It was from the Holt family attorney, the one who managed Margaret's trust, and it referenced an amendment to the trust terms. The amendment conditioned Daniel's inheritance on his marriage, producing an heir of direct Holt lineage, verifiable by the family's genetic standards. There was a secondary clause. It described what would happen to Daniel's existing access to trust funds if the marriage continued without satisfactory resolution. Claire photographed the email, closed it, and marked it unread. She went and sat in the driveway in her car for 20 minutes. Then she came back inside and started dinner. She was smart, and she was careful, and she was terrified. And she didn't call me because she thought she needed more before she could walk away. She wanted the whole picture. She was still building it when everything moved faster than she planned. It was a Thursday in early June. Daniel was in Pittsburgh for a deposition that was scheduled to run through Friday. Claire got a call from Margaret in the afternoon, an unusual time, asking if she'd like to come for dinner. Just the two of them. Woman to woman. Margaret said, "I've been thinking about some things I want to share with you." Claire almost said no. She told me later she almost said no. that some instinct fired in her that she overrode because she didn't want to show her hand. She went. The dinner itself was quiet and almost pleasant. Margaret was different that night, softer in a way that seemed deliberate. Almost practiced. She talked about Daniel as a boy. Pulled out photographs. She poured Claire a glass of wine, which Claire accepted, and did not drink more than a few sips of. She talked, obliquely, about family and legacy and the grief of watching things you love change. Nothing said directly. Everything said. At the end of the meal, Margaret looked at Claire for a long moment and said, very quietly, "You're a strong woman, Claire. I want you to know I've always seen that. I've just had to protect what is mine." Claire thanked her for dinner and drove home. She was 2 miles from the house when the car began to pull hard to the right. She corrected it. Felt the wheels shimmy. Pulled to the shoulder. The rear tire was flat. She got out. It was full dark now. A rural stretch between Margaret's estate and the highway. No houses close. She called roadside assistance. 23-minute wait. She walked to the back of the car to look at the tire. That was when the truck pulled up behind her. There were 2 men. She didn't know them. They were polite in the manner of people who have been told to be polite. They said they'd seen her pulled over. Offered to help. She said she had help coming. The bigger one said it would go faster if she just came and sat in the truck while they handled it. She stepped back. He stepped forward. She ran into the tree line off the shoulder because there was nowhere else to go. She knew she had her phone. She ran until she couldn't hear them behind her. Then dropped into the brush and tried to call 911. The call connected and dropped. Connected and dropped. She sent a text to a number that wasn't mine, a friend in Annapolis, and then her phone died. She walked for what she estimated was 2 hours through the dark. In heels she'd worn to dinner at her mother-in-law's house, navigating by the faint orange glow of the highway in the distance. She turned her ankle on a root. She walked on it. She fell once. Against a fallen trunk. And that was the rib cracked. She'd later learn, not broken. She came out of the tree line onto the ramp of a rest stop and sat down on the curb and started to shake. A trucker named Beverly had given her the blanket and called her car the word she used for her own daughter, and then gone to buy her a water and a bag of chips and hadn't asked any questions that weren't gentle. Claire had used Beverly's phone charger for 15 minutes and called me. I listened to all of this in the car. Driving south. The heat on. The highway dark and empty. When she finished, I kept my hands very steady on the wheel. "Did you save the photographs?" I asked. "Everything is in the cloud," she said. "All of it." I nodded. "Okay. Dad, I don't want the police yet. I want to do this right." I understood what she meant. I'd spent 26 years as a claims investigator for an insurance firm before I retired. I knew what evidence that's handled correctly can do, and I knew what happens when it isn't. My brother, Raymond, was a retired federal prosecutor. My daughter had married into a family with lawyers on retainer and a judge in the Christmas card rotation. We were going to do this right. I drove Claire to my house in Fredericksburg and got her into the spare bedroom and called Raymond at 6 a.m. He listened without interrupting, which is what he does when something is serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Tell her not to contact Daniel yet," he said, "and tell her not to touch the supplements." "Already told her." "And the car?" "The tire. I'll drive her back to get it this afternoon. We photograph it first." He was quiet again. "This is going to take a few months." "I know. You sure she's ready for that?" I looked down the hallway at the closed door of the spare bedroom. She walked 2 hours through the woods in heels with a cracked rib rather than get in that truck. I said, "She's ready." What followed was 91 days that I will describe as methodical, because that is the word that kept me from doing things that would have cost Claire everything she was trying to build. The tire, when we photographed and then had examined, showed a puncture consistent with a nail set tool rather than road debris. Raymond's contact at the Maryland State Police said it was inconclusive but notable. We noted it. The supplement bottles were tested at a certified laboratory Two of the compounds were present at levels that, according to the toxicologist Raymond retained, they were inconsistent with the labeled dosage and were consistent with compounds known to affect early pregnancy outcomes in women with certain hormonal profiles. The toxicologist used careful language. In her written report, that language was still significant enough that Raymond read it twice before putting it down. The genetic testing report Claire had found, the one from the private laboratory, was traceable. That was Margaret's first real mistake. The laboratory had a record of the order. The order had been placed by an account linked to Margaret's personal email. Obtaining Claire's medical data without consent for that test was a HIPAA violation. And depending on what was done with it, potentially more. The trust amendment was traceable. Daniel. When Raymond and I finally sat down with him in a conference room in Baltimore, had not known about the amendment. I watched his face when Raymond read the relevant clause aloud. I'd met men who were good actors. Daniel was not acting. He went gray in a way that started at his hairline and moved down. He'd known his mother disapproved. He had not known the shape of what she'd built around that disapproval. He signed every document Raymond put in front of him before we left that room. He cooperated completely with everything that came after. I will say that for him, Margaret Holt had a very good attorney. He was good enough to take the initial call with the confidence of a man who had navigated worse. He was not good enough for what Raymond and 3 co-counsel, including a civil rights attorney out of Washington, brought into the room 6 weeks later. The HIPAA violation, on its own, carried civil liability. The supplement issue, paired with the laboratory report and the trust amendment, told a story that the civil rights attorney described as among the more documented cases of reproductive coercion she had encountered in 20 years of practice. The trust amendment itself, once deposed, implicated the Holt family attorney in a conspiracy to condition inheritance on racial outcome. That attorney resigned from the firm within a week of the first deposition. Margaret's attorneys recommended settlement. Margaret, from what Raymond heard, had not immediately agreed. Then the civil rights attorney filed a complaint with the Maryland Insurance Administration regarding the supplement supplier, and that investigation opened a second file that involved people and money Margaret had not wanted examined. She agreed to settlement terms shortly after that. The terms were not public. What I can say is that Claire is not going to have to worry about money, or about what she puts in her body, or about whether she can afford to fight anyone, for the rest of her life. Margaret Holt did not go to prison. That is the truth. The criminal referral for the HIPAA violation was declined by the U.S. Attorney's Office, who had bigger cases and less evidence than Raymond had hoped for. The supplement case fell into a civil gray zone. The 2 men from the truck were never identified with sufficient certainty for charges to stick. I am not going to pretend that is justice. It is not all the justice the situation deserved, but I have watched enough people try to fight old money with rage alone to know what that gets you. What Claire got was her freedom, her health, air finance, and a name that Margaret Holt will hear in her lawyer's offices for the remainder of her comfortable life every time she considers doing this to someone else. Claire is in Annapolis now. She has a good apartment with a view of the water and a job she loves, and a dog named Howard who weighs 11 pounds and acts like he outweighs everything. She called me last Sunday, a good call. A Sunday call. The kind where we talked about nothing for 40 minutes and at the end she said, "I'm okay. Dad, I'm actually okay." I believed her. I believe her the way I believed her. The morning I drove 3 hours in the dark and found her on that curb, not because she said so, but because I know that voice, and I know every color it turns. She's my daughter. I've known that voice for 31 years. I drove. That's what you do.